Strategy, A History by Lawrence Freedman. Published Oxford Press, 2013. The Myth of the Master Strategist. Page 237. The framework for thinking about war and strategy inspired by Napoleon and developed in its most suggestive form by Clausewitz was not easily displaced. So shrewd were Clausewitz's insights and so compelling his formulations that it was hard to think of alternative ways to study war effectively. Those who drew attention to their greater knowledge about past wars and developments that he could not have imagined missed the point. The enduring power of his analytical framework lay in the dynamic interplay of politics, violence, and chance. It was because of this that writers on military strategy continued to assert their fealty to the great master. One of these, Colin Gray, wondered why modern strategic thought compared so poorly with On War. There were no war leaders comparable to Napoleon able to inspire great interpretive theory. He also pointed to a lack of military practitioners comfortable with theory or civilian theorists familiar with practice. The complexity of modern warfare challenged the lone theorist, while those concerned with national strategy had become too focused on immediate policy issues. Gray had an exalted view of the strategist as someone who could view the system as a whole, taking account of the multiple interdependencies and the numerous factors at play in order to identify where effort could be most profitably applied. In his modern strategy, he identified 17 factors to take into account: people, society, culture, politics, ethics, economics and logistics, organization, administration, information and intelligence, strategic theory and doctrine, technology, operations, command, geography, friction, chance, uncertainty, adversary, and time. Proper strategy required that these be considered holistically, that is, both individually and in context with the others. This was picked up by Harry Yarger, a teacher at the U.S. Army War College, who went even further. Strategic thinking is about thoroughness and holistic thinking. It seeks to understand how the parts interact to form the whole by looking at parts and relationships among them, the effects they have on one another in the past, present, and anticipated future." End quote. This holistic perspective would require a comprehensive knowledge of what else is happening within the strategic environment and the potential first, second, and third order effects of its own choices on the efforts of those above, below, and on the strategist's own level. Nor would it be good enough to work with snapshots and early gains. The strategist must reject the expedient, near-term solution for the long-term benefit. So much was expected of the true strategist, a student of the present who must be aware of the past, sensitive to the possibilities of the future, conscious of the danger of bias, alert to ambiguity, alive to chaos, ready to think through consequences of alternative courses of action, and then able to articulate all this with sufficient precision for those who must execute its prescriptions. This was a counsel of perfection. There was only so much knowledge that an individual could accumulate, assimilate, and manipulate, only so many potential sequences of events that could be worked through in a system that was full of uncertainty, complexity, and chaos. Gray also concluded that this was too much, accepting that he had also been too ambitious. Yarger, he observed, appeared to encourage, even demand, an impossibility. Even making a start on these factors required a considerable technical and conceptual grasp. Nonetheless, Gray still described a strategist as someone rather special, with an exceedingly demanding job description, able to see the big picture and familiar with all of war's dimensions. He quoted with approval Fred Ickley's observation that good work on national strategy required a rotund intellect, a well-rounded personality. Similarly, Yarger had described strategy as the domain of the strong intellect, the lifelong student, the dedicated professional, and the invulnerable ego. Could there be such a master strategist with this unique grasp of affairs? If ever found, this person would be a precious resource and in great demand, torn between hard looks into the future and the need to take time to communicate conclusions in an intelligible form to those who must follow them. As such systematic and forward thinking would open up numerous risks and possibilities, any value to a practitioner would require sharpening the focus. An all-encompassing view of the environment might be welcomed by a government before embarking on a major initiative where it could expect to take the first move, but could also be a luxury when coping with sudden developments that had unaccountably been missed. Then strategy might be more improvised and ad hoc. In such circumstances, the master strategist might feel a tad unprepared. The supposed holistic view of the master strategist would also be problematic. There were good reasons to pay attention to systems effects, the unanticipated results of connections between apparently separate spheres of activity. The likelihood of unexpected effects was a good reason to take care when urging bold moves and then to monitor closely their consequences once taken. Exploring the range and variety of relationships within the broader environment could help identify creative possibilities by generating indirect forms of influence, targeting an opponent's weakest links, or forging surprising alliances. This did not, however, require a view of the whole system. There had to be some boundaries. In principle, everything was connected to everything else. In practice, the repercussions of a localized action might fade away quite soon. In addition, a holistic view implied an ability to look at a complete system from without, whereas the practical strategist's perspective was bound to be more myopic, focusing on what was close and evidently consequential rather than on distant features that might never need to be engaged. Over time, the focus might change. That was not an argument to attempt to anticipate everything in advance, but to recognize the unreality of insisting on setting out with confidence, certainty, and clarity a series of steps that were sure to reach long-term goals. The idea that societies and their associated military systems might be comprehended as complex systems encouraged the view, reflected in the perplexing searches for enemy centers of gravity, that hitting an enemy system in exactly the right place would cause it to crumble quickly, as the impact would reverberate and affect all the interconnected parts. The frustration of the search was a result of the fact that effects could not simply radiate out from some vital center. Societies could adapt to shocks. As systems, they could break down into more viable subsystems, establish barriers, reduce dependencies, and find alternative forms of sustenance. Feedback would be constant and complex. Clausewitz did present war as a dynamic system, but it was also remarkably self-contained. He was a theorist of war and not of international politics. He looked backward to the political source of war, but that was not where he started. At the level of national policy, what eventually became called grand strategy, questions had to be asked about how goals were to be best met. The answers might exclude the armed forces or assign them only a minor role. It was only at this more political level that the success of any military operation could be judged and claims of victory assessed. The quality and timelessness of Clausewitz's analysis of the phenomenon of war left behind the context from which it sprang, that is, the upheaval set in motion by the French Revolution. His focus on decisive victory required reassessment in the light of changes in the political context. Even when it was pointed out that Clausewitz had begun to reappraise limited war, the concept of a decisive battle retained its powerful hold over the military profession. The attraction was not hard to see. It gave the armed forces a special role and responsibility. The fate of the nation was in their hands, a point to be emphasized when seeking additional resources or political support. If affairs could be settled without decisive battles, then the general staffs could lose their importance and clout. Battle, however, became increasingly problematic as firepower became more ferocious over greater ranges and more men could be mobilized to pour into a fight. To retain the possibility of decisiveness, some critical new factor had to be found. Prior to the First World War, it was detected in the motivating effects of high morale and a brave national spirit. Afterwards, the focus was on the possibilities of surprise and maneuver to overcome the devastating effects of enemy firepower by disorienting them. This interest was revived in the United States during the latter decades of the 20th century through the outcomes of the regular military campaigns. Though the outcomes of the regular military campaigns could be predicted as much by reference to the raw balance of military power as to any superior operational cleverness. Even then, apparent victory could be compromised as regular wars turned into irregular struggles. This need not have been news. Clausewitz had noted the effectiveness of the first guerrillas in Spain against Napoleon. Occupying armies regularly faced harassment from a sullen and resistant population. This phenomenon was evident in the challenges to colonialism. When regular battles seemed to lead to stalemate, governments could well try to break the deadlock by seeking to coerce civilian populations, whether through naval blockades or air raids. Popular morale became as important, if not more so, than military morale. So from the micro level of counterinsurgency, as well as the macro level of nuclear deterrence, the key effects were not those posed by one armed force against another, but those posed against the adversary's political and social structures.